When my sister, Jessica, asked to move in with me, I didn't hesitate to say yes. She had fallen on hard times, recently divorced, lost her job, and needed a place to stay. I had just bought my own house, so I figured I had the space. Besides, she's my sister and family helps family, right? First, everything was fine. Jessica seemed grateful, and I was happy to help her get back on her feet. She said it would only be for a few months, just until she found a new job and could get a place of her own. But as the months rolled by, things started to feel off. Jessica didn't seem to be in any rush to move out. She had turned the guest room into her own mini apartment and started bringing more of her stuff into the house. Boxes of clothes, furniture, decorations. Felt like she was settling in. But I didn't say anything, trying to keep the peace. I figured she'd leave when she was ready. Then one day, I came home to find Jessica rearranging the living room. My furniture had been pushed around, and she was hanging up new curtains that I definitely hadn't picked out. When I asked her what was going on, she brushed me off, saying she was just making the place more cozy. That's when it hit me. Jessica wasn't just staying here. She was acting like the house was hers. It was a small thing, sure, but it gave me an uneasy feeling. I started to wonder if letting her move in had been a mistake. But little did I know, this was only the beginning. After the living room incident, I started paying more attention to how Jessica was acting. Little by little, she was taking over the house. It wasn't just about moving things around. She began making decisions as if she were the one who owned the place. She started inviting her friends over without asking, and one night, I came home to find a full-blown party happening in my living room. Loud music, people I didn't even know drinking my alcohol. I pulled Jessica aside and asked her why she didn't at least check with me first. "Relax, it's just a few friends," she said with a dismissive wave. "Besides, this place is big enough for both of us. I thought you wouldn't mind." But I did mind. I bought this house. I worked hard to make it mine, and now it felt like I was a guest in my own home. I tried talking to her about boundaries, but Jessica had a way of turning everything around. She'd say things like, "I'm your sister. I thought family meant more to you." Or, "I'm just trying to live my life after everything I've been through." As if I was the one being unreasonable. Things escalated when she started receiving mail at my address. Bills, letters, packages, all with her name on them. It felt like she was settling in for the long haul, but I couldn't figure out how to bring it up without sounding like the bad guy. One morning, I woke up to find my favorite chair missing from the living room. When I asked Jessica where it was, she casually replied, "Oh, I didn't think you needed it, so I moved it to the garage. I'm redecorating a bit." That was it. I realized then that Jessica had no intention of leaving anytime soon, and if I didn't do something, she might never leave. But I had no idea just how far things would go. After the chair incident, I knew I had to take action. I wasn't about to let Jessica keep walking all over me in my own home. So, I decided to sit her down for a serious talk. "Jessica, we need to talk," I said one evening after she got home. She was, of course, holding a shopping bag from some high-end store, no doubt bought with the money I lent her. She sighed dramatically, clearly not in the mood for a conversation. "What now? I can't keep living like this. You've taken over the house, invited people without asking, moved my things around, and it's starting to feel like I don't even live here anymore." Jessica rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, you're so dramatic. You act like I've taken over the whole house or something." "You have," I insisted, "and it's not fair. I need you to start respecting the space or make plans to find your own place." At that moment, Jessica's face changed. Her carefree attitude vanished, replaced by something colder. She folded her arms and said, "Actually, I was going to talk to you about something." "What?" "I think it's time for you to move out." I blinked. "Excuse me? I mean, come on," she continued, leaning back in her chair. "You're never really here, you're always at work. You don't need all this space. And I could really use the house, for my business to have more room for myself. You could get a nice apartment, something smaller. I could take care of the house." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Jessica was actually asking me, no, telling me, to move out of the house I owned. The audacity was off the charts. "Are you serious right now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. As serious as it gets? She replied, completely unfazed. That's when I knew this wasn't just about boundaries anymore. Jessica was trying to take over my entire life. She thought she could push me out of my own home. But what she didn't know was that I had no intention of leaving. In fact, I was already planning my next move. After Jessica dropped that bomb, I sat there in disbelief. My own sister, who I had opened my home to, was telling me to leave. I had half a mind to throw her out right then and there, but I kept my cool. If I was going to do this, I had to be smart. You're out of your mind if you think I'm leaving my house, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I let you stay here because you needed help, but this is still my place, Jessica. I'm not going anywhere. She shrugged, not even bothered. Well, we'll see about that. Her attitude lit a fire under me. I knew then that she wasn't going to back down. And if she thought she could bully me into leaving, she had another thing coming. I had worked too hard to let her walk all over me. I didn't say anything more, but inside I was already forming a plan. First, I had to get control of the situation, and that meant reminding Jessica whose name was on the deed. But I wasn't going to confront her just yet. I needed to gather my proof, my leverage. Over the next few days, I started documenting everything. Every time she had someone over without my permission, I took pictures. Every time she left a mess or moved my things, I noted it. And I made sure to check the legal side of things too, looking up tenants' rights and making sure there was no way she could claim any stake in the house just by living there. The more I learned, the clearer it became. Jessica had no leg to stand on. She was just bluffing, trying to wear me down. But if she wanted to play dirty, I was ready. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day, I decided to test the waters. I think you should start looking for your own place, I said casually over dinner. Jessica didn't even look up from her phone. Nah, I'm good here, she replied with that smug tone of hers. Not for long, I muttered under my breath. She didn't know it yet, but I was getting ready to draw the line in the sand. Jessica had pushed me too far, and I wasn't going to let her take over my life. My plan was in motion, and soon, she'd realize that she was the one who'd be leaving. Now that I knew I had the upper hand, it was time to turn things around. I started subtly making changes around the house. Nothing major, just enough to shake things up. I stopped stocking the fridge with her favorite snacks, locked my office door so she couldn't borrow my stuff, and even disconnected the Wi-Fi a few times by accident. Every little inconvenience was part of my plan to make her uncomfortable without directly confronting her. Jessica didn't seem to notice right away, but it didn't take long before her irritation started showing. One morning, she stormed into the kitchen, slamming cabinets as she looked for her usual breakfast. Where's the cereal? She snapped. I ran out, I said with a shrug, not even looking up from my coffee. Figured you could get your own groceries since you're living here for free and all. That hit a nerve. She glared at me, but didn't say anything. I knew she was too proud to admit she was bothered. That was fine by me, I wasn't done yet. The next step was more strategic. I started asking mutual friends if they knew of any apartments for rent. Not for me, but for her. I casually mentioned to a few people that Jessica was thinking about moving out soon, dropping hints that she wasn't planning to stay much longer. Word spread fast in our circle, and soon enough, Jessica's friends were asking her about it. Are you really moving out? One of her friends asked over coffee one afternoon. Jessica was caught off guard. What? No. Who said that? Her friend gave her a confused look. I heard it from a few people. Isn't it true? Jessica's face turned red. I was sitting across the room, pretending to be busy on my phone, but I could feel the tension rising. My plan was working. I was getting under her skin, and it was only a matter of time before she snapped. Later that evening, she cornered me in the hallway. Why are people saying I'm moving out? She demanded. I played dumb. I don't know. Maybe because you should be? Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond. Instead, she stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. I knew I was pushing her buttons, but that was the point. The more frustrated she got, the less control she had, and soon, she'd realize she wasn't the one calling the shots anymore. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for her to take the bait. Jessica's frustration was reaching a boiling point, and it showed in everything she did. She started avoiding me around the house, spending more time locked in her room or out with friends. I knew she was feeling cornered, but I wasn't about to let up now. One evening, I overheard her on the phone, venting to a friend. "I don't know what's going on," she hissed. "He's acting weird, like he wants me out. He's turning everyone against me, but I can't just leave. I don't have anywhere else to go right now." Her voice was desperate, and that was exactly what I needed. If she wasn't ready to leave on her own, I'd just push her a little further. The next day, I escalated things by accidentally sending a group message to a few of our mutual friends, talking about how I was finally getting my space back soon, since Jessica was planning to move out. Of course, I knew it would get back to her. It didn't take long. Jessica stormed into the living room, phone in hand, her face a mix of confusion and anger. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, shoving her phone in my face. The message thread was right there, my accidental text laid out for her to see. I shrugged, not bothering to hide my smirk. "Guess it's just time for a change, don't you think? You can't just kick me out. I have rights too," she spat, her voice rising. "I'm not kicking you out," I replied calmly. "But if you're feeling uncomfortable, maybe it's for the best. Find a place of your own. You've been here long enough." Her hands clenched into fists, and I could see her mind racing. She was stubborn, sure, but even she had to know this was a losing battle. She couldn't stay here forever, not with the way things were going. The house didn't feel like hers anymore, and that was exactly how I wanted it. But just as I thought I had her cornered, Jessica threw me a curveball I didn't see coming. "You think you've won, don't you?" she hissed. "Well, I've got news for you. I'm not going anywhere. In fact, I'm going to fight for this house. You don't get to just push me out like I'm nothing." Her words hung in the air, and I realized she wasn't as defeated as I thought. Instead of backing down, Jessica was preparing for a fight. But what she didn't know was that I had one more card to play, one that would turn the tables in a way she never expected. After Jessica's declaration that she wasn't going anywhere, I could feel the tension rise in the house like never before. It was war now. I wasn't going to let her take over my home, but I also wasn't ready for the move she pulled next. A few days later, I got an unexpected letter in the mail. At first, I thought it was junk, until I noticed the sender, a lawyer's office. Confused, I ripped open the envelope, and inside was a formal letter. Jessica had filed a claim to contest her right to stay in the house. She wasn't bluffing. Apparently, she had been talking to a lawyer behind my back, gathering information on tenant rights, and found some obscure loophole that she thought might give her a chance to stay. The letter claimed that because she had been living here for a certain period of time, she could potentially have rights as a resident, even if her name wasn't on the deed. I was floored. She wasn't just talking big. Jessica was actually going through legal channels to challenge me for the house. I couldn't believe she'd gotten this serious. But one thing was for sure, I wasn't going to let her win. I immediately called my own lawyer to figure out what I was up against. He reassured me that since I was the sole owner of the house, her claim wouldn't hold up in court. But it wouldn't be easy either. If she dragged this out, it could mean months of legal back and forth. I wasn't about to waste all that time and money on this ridiculous fight. So I came up with a plan to force her hand. I had to make staying here as uncomfortable as possible for her, but in a way that didn't cross any legal boundaries. Over the next few days, I started making little changes around the house. Nothing that seemed outright hostile, but enough to get on Jessica's nerves. I started turning the heat down at night, just a little too cold to be comfortable. Then I'd make loud noises early in the morning, knowing she hated being woken up. I even began inviting friends over more often, taking over the living room and kitchen, making sure she couldn't enjoy her own space. Jessica noticed right away. Every little thing I did chipped away at her resolve. But she wasn't about to admit defeat, not yet. The breaking point came when I switched the Wi-Fi password and conveniently forgot to give it to her. She flipped out, storming into my room demanding it. "I pay for half the bills here, you can't do this," she yelled. her face red with anger. "I don't recall you ever paying for the Wi-Fi," I said calmly, leaning back in my chair. "You want the password? Fine, when you move out." Her eyes flashed with fury, but I could tell she was starting to crack. She could only hold out for so long. But just when I thought I had her on the ropes, Jessica hit me with one more move that would turn everything upside down, that I was feeling pretty confident after the Wi-Fi stunt. Jessica was clearly getting more frustrated, and I could sense that I was close to breaking her will to stay. But then, just when I thought I had the upper hand, she pulled something completely unexpected. One afternoon, I came home from work to find a car I didn't recognize parked in the driveway. Inside the house, I heard voices coming from the living room. I walked in, and there was Jessica, sitting with a middle-aged man who looked strangely familiar. Jessica stood up as soon as she saw me, a smug look on her face. "Meet Uncle Dave," she said, gesturing toward the man on the couch. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Uncle Dave was a relative of ours who I hadn't seen in years. He was one of those distant family members who always stayed on the fringe of things, never really involved, but always around just enough to remind you of his existence. I was confused. What was he doing here? "He's going to be living here," Jessica announced casually, crossing her arms. I blinked. "Excuse me? Living here?" "Yep," Jessica said, a gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. "You said you wanted me out, right? Well, I've made arrangements. I'll be moving out, but Uncle Dave's going to be staying in my place." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I didn't sign up for another housemate, let alone someone like Uncle Dave, who was known for being a bit of a freeloader. This was Jessica's move. She was leaving, but she was leaving a mess behind. Uncle Dave was her trump card, and it was a brilliant, if devious, play. Uncle Dave sat there, looking as pleased as could be. "Jessica said I could stay with family for a bit," he chimed in, trying to sound innocent. "Family?" I shot back. "You're barely even around. You can't just move in here like this." Jessica shrugged. "Well, it's not up to you, is it? Family helps family. You wouldn't kick out your own uncle, would you?" I was speechless. This was an entirely new level of manipulation. Jessica knew that if she moved out, she couldn't win the fight for the house. So, she was leaving me with a problem that was even worse, someone who would be nearly impossible to get rid of. Uncle Dave didn't have a steady job, and I knew he'd try to mooch off me for as long as he could. This wasn't just about Jessica anymore. Now I had to figure out how to deal with Uncle Dave, too. I was furious, but I couldn't let her see that. I had to think quickly. If Jessica thought she could leave her mess behind and walk away scot-free, she was wrong. I needed to come up with a counterplan. Fast. And this time it had to be bulletproof. After the whole Uncle Dave situation, I realized I was dealing with a much bigger challenge than I thought. Jessica wasn't just trying to take over my home. She was making sure that her departure would leave me with a mess I couldn't easily clean up. Uncle Dave was now part of the equation, and he wasn't someone I could just kick out on a whim. But I wasn't about to back down. I'd already let Jessica walk all over me too many times, and this was the last straw. I needed a plan, and I needed it to be quiet, calculated, and above all, effective. The first thing I did was take a step back. I stopped reacting to her taunts and the little digs she kept throwing my way. Every time she tried to push my buttons, I just let it roll off my back. I kept my emotions in check, because I knew that if I let her see how much she was getting to me, she'd use it to her advantage. Instead, I started quietly preparing for what was coming next. I researched everything I could about tenant laws, eviction procedures, and what rights I had as the homeowner. I wasn't about to let her and Uncle Dave waltz in and make themselves permanent fixtures in my house without a fight. Meanwhile, Jessica was getting more and more comfortable with the idea of her leaving, almost as though she believed I was too weak to stand up to her. She had no idea that I was already building my case, documenting every little thing she was doing. If she thought this would be easy for her, she was in for a rude awakening. I also started working on the practical side of things, fixing up the house so it looked more presentable. If I had to go to court, I needed to make sure everything was in order. I couldn't afford to let her accuse me of anything that could make me look bad. At the same time, I was preparing emotionally. I knew this wasn't going to be a quick fix. It was going to take time and a lot of patience. But I wasn't about to let her walk away with everything just because she thought she had the upper hand. I kept my focus sharp, every move calculated. No more surprises from Jessica. This time, I was the one who was going to win at S. I continued gathering information. I knew it was time to start making my moves. Jessica had been underestimating me for far too long, and now it was time to flip the script. I knew I needed to act carefully to avoid giving her any reason to claim I was being vindictive or unreasonable. But at the same time, I couldn't just sit back and let her steamroll me. One evening, when Jessica was out with her friends, I made a few calls. I got in touch with a real estate agent to get an assessment of the house's current value. I needed to be prepared in case things escalated, and if she really thought she could just walk in and take over, I had to be ready to prove otherwise. The agent came over, and as he walked through the house, he kept commenting on how much potential it had, how much it was worth. The house was my investment, my future. Jessica had no right to just waltz in and claim it. The agent assured me that the value of the house had appreciated quite a bit over the last few years. I made mental notes of everything he said. This was important information. The next step in my plan was to make sure Jessica knew I wasn't going to let this go without a fight. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me scramble. She was about to get a lesson in how much I had learned, and more importantly, how much power I still had in this situation. Later that night, after dinner, I casually brought up the topic of the house. I knew Jessica loved to talk about what her future looked like in this place, so I let her take the bait. So, have you and Uncle Dave decided where you're going to stay after this? Or are you planning to move into the guest room full-time? I asked, keeping my voice casual, but with just a hint of curiosity. She looked at me, a smirk forming on her face. I don't know, maybe we'll find a place of our own. But it's not like you're really doing much with this house anyway. I paused. That was exactly what I needed to hear. Well, that's funny, I said with a smile, because I'm actually thinking of making some changes around here, maybe even putting it up for sale. She froze, her eyes widening for a second. I could tell she hadn't expected that response. Oh, she replied, trying to play it cool. Well, I hope you're not in over your head with that decision. I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out if I was bluffing. But I wasn't. This was the first step of showing her that I was in control, not her. The conversation ended with her trying to brush it off, but I could tell I'd planted a seed of doubt in her mind. I was officially starting to take control back. This wasn't going to be easy, but it felt good to finally make a move. And this was just the beginning. The next day, I received an unexpected knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened it, there stood Jessica, looking a little too eager. She had clearly been thinking about our conversation from last night. I could tell because of the way she was standing, almost like she was trying to act casual but failing miserably. Hey, I was just wondering, could we talk about the house for a bit? I've been thinking about it, Jessica said, her tone sounding a little too sweet. I raised an eyebrow. Sure, come in. What's on your mind? She stepped inside, and we sat down at the kitchen table. I had a feeling she wasn't just here to chat. She was up to something. I've been thinking about how things are going here, she started, nervously fiddling with her hands. And maybe it's time for a change. I mean, this house really isn't serving its full potential, right? Maybe it would be better if we... I cut her off before she could go any further. We? What exactly do you mean by we? Her eyes widened, but she quickly recovered. Well, I mean, I'm just saying, maybe it's time you think about moving somewhere else. A fresh start, You're not really doing much with the place anyway. There it was, the bold move. It was exactly what I expected. She was trying to plant the idea in my head that the house wasn't really mine anymore, that I was the one holding everyone back from moving forward. But I wasn't about to let her off easy. I leaned back in my chair, taking a slow sip of my coffee, keeping my cool. Funny you should mention that. I've been thinking a lot about it too, actually. I think it's time for some changes around here. Jessica's eyes lit up, and for a second, I could see a small glimmer of hope in her expression. She was thinking she was winning, but little did she know, I wasn't about to let her pull any fast ones. I've already been talking to a real estate agent. This place has a lot of value now, more than it used to. So I was considering selling it, I said casually, watching her reaction carefully. Her smile faltered for just a split second, but she quickly recovered, trying to keep the conversation light. Oh, really? Well, I guess it makes sense. But, we could always do some renovations. Spruce things up, make it even more valuable. I shook my head, cutting her off again. Actually, I think I might want to sell it as is. The market is really good right now, and I'm not sure waiting around for renovations is the best idea. Maybe I'll even take the cash and invest in something new. The tension in the room thickened. I could tell that Jessica hadn't expected me to be this serious about it. She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could say anything, I stood up, signaling the conversation was over. Anyway, I've got a lot to think about. I'll let you know if I decide to sell, I said, giving her a tight smile. But, if you're planning on staying here, you might want to start thinking about where you'll go next. Her expression darkened as she stood up to leave, clearly rattled. Yeah, well, think about it, she muttered before storming out. I couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction. Jessica hadn't seen this coming, and now she was second-guessing everything. But this wasn't over, not by a long shot. I had to keep the pressure on, and if she thought she was going to push me around, she had another thing coming. The game was on. The next few days were filled with strange energy in the house. Every time I bumped into Jessica, she was trying to act normal, but I could see the nervous tension in her eyes. She wasn't used to me playing the game this way, and I could tell it was driving her crazy. She had always thought she could call the shots, but now, she wasn't sure what to expect from me. I decided to keep my distance for a bit, giving her space to stew over what I'd said. But at the same time, I kept putting little hints in place, making it clear that I was serious about making moves. I started talking to contractors about repairs and even reached out to a lawyer about the legal side of selling the house. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. One evening, as I was walking into the living room after finishing a long day, I noticed Jessica standing by the front door, looking at the lock and deep in thought. The moment she saw me, she straightened up and put on that fake smile. But this time it wasn't working. I could tell she was planning something. Hey, I've been thinking, she started, trying to sound casual. Maybe we could talk about the house some more. I've been doing some research and I think I've got a better idea. I raised an eyebrow. Oh? What's that? She hesitated for a moment, and I could almost see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out how to spin this in her favor. Finally, she spoke. What if we could both stay? I mean, you could have your space and I could have mine. We could just figure out the house thing together as a family. I couldn't help but laugh internally. This was her big plan? To play the family card? She had no idea that I was already 10 steps ahead of her. Jessica? I said slowly, locking eyes with her. I don't think you're getting the message. This isn't about staying here or being a family. This is about me taking control of what's mine, and you can either respect that, or you can find your own way. She swallowed hard, but she didn't back down. I'm just saying I don't want things to get messy. We've always been family, and I don't think it should end like this. Don't you think we should try to find a solution? I shook my head. The solution was already made. I'm moving forward with selling, and that's the end of it. Her face flushed with frustration, but she quickly masked it. Okay then, I guess I'll just have to figure out what to do next. And just like that, she turned and left the room, not saying another word. I knew she was scrambling, trying to figure out her next move. But the truth was, Jessica didn't have control anymore. She thought she could push me around, but now she was in a position where she had to react to everything I did. And I wasn't about to make it easy for her. As I sat there, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. I had a plan and I wasn't backing down. Jessica thought she was going to win, but she was about to find out how wrong she was. The final move was coming, and when it did, she wouldn't even know what hit her. The next day, I woke up to a storm of messages and missed calls. Jessica had been relentless. Texting, calling, and even leaving voicemails, all demanding answers. But I wasn't interested in any of her excuses. No more games. When I finally decided to answer one of her calls, her voice was sharp, demanding. You think you can just kick me out of our home, take what's rightfully mine, and get away with it? You don't have the right, you never did. I laughed under my breath, finally able to hold my ground. What's rightfully yours? Jessica, you've crossed so many lines. It's not even funny anymore. This house, everything I've worked for, it's all mine. You've spent years trying to manipulate your way into everything I've built. But that stops now. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the wheels turning in her head. But then, with a bitter laugh, she retorted. You think you can push me out just like that? You're going to regret this. I promise you. I wasn't intimidated, not anymore. No, Jessica. I'm not going to regret a single thing. This is my house, my life, and you've overstayed your welcome. Her voice grew desperate, trying to play the victim. You've always been the selfish one, always getting everything you want, leaving me to clean up the mess. I was trying to help you, but you always push me away. You never appreciated me, and now you've ruined everything. I was done listening to her excuses. No, Jessica. You've been manipulating me for years. You've taken enough from me. It's time you learned what it feels like to lose control. I ended the call before she could say another word. I didn't need her drama in my life anymore. The house, everything in it, was mine. And if she thought she could intimidate me into backing down, she had another thing coming. The next few hours were tense. I could feel Jessica's anger simmering on the other side of the door. I knew she was trying to figure out her next move, but I wasn't giving her the chance. I called my lawyer and made sure all the necessary paperwork was in place. I wasn't playing this game anymore. I waited for Jessica to come home, knowing this was the moment where everything would change. When she finally walked through the door, I stood up, straightened my shoulders, and looked her in the eye. I've made my decision, I said firmly. You need to leave. Her eyes widened with shock, and she took a step back. What? You're serious? Dead serious, I replied. You've had your chance and you've blown it. I'm not going to let you continue to live off me and manipulate everyone around you. For a moment, she just stood there, stunned. Then the anger took over. You can't do this. I'm not going anywhere. This is my home too. I shook my head. Not anymore, Jessica. You're out. I'm done. The fight that followed was brief but intense. She tried to pack her things, but every time she reached for something, I reminded her that it wasn't hers to take. I wasn't letting her leave with anything that didn't belong to her. Finally, she grabbed a bag, stormed out the door, and slammed it behind her. I heard her voice shouting something from the yard, but I didn't bother listening. I didn't need to. I had pushed her out for good. With Jessica gone, I finally felt like I could breathe again. The house was quiet, my life was mine once more, and I wasn't going to let anyone, family or not, take that from me. I spent the next few days putting everything back in order, reclaiming my space and setting boundaries. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I'd been pushed to my limits, and now it was time to live life on my own terms. Jessica tried reaching out a few times, but each call went unanswered. She was done trying to guilt-trip me, and I was done allowing it. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I knew I had made the right decision. Now it was time to focus on myself, my future, and my happiness. And if Jessica ever tried to come back or cause trouble again, I'd be ready. She had no idea what she'd just walked away from, but I wasn't going to let her back into my life, my home, my rules. And Jessica learned the hard way that family doesn't get to take whatever they want. Sometimes you have to take a stand, even when it means pushing the people closest to you out the door.